All right. So we're going to begin by counting the Omer. The Omer, as a reminder, this is the period between Passover and Shavuot, 7 weeks of 7 days each, until we bring the first bushel, the first Omer of, 7 weeks after we brought the first bushel of barley to the temple, as a way of saying thank you to God for having a good harvest. So the Torah tells us to count, and therefore it's a la'asok b'div. It is an asher kishavu mitzvotav sivanu blessing. Then the end of it is al sfirat omer. So let's say that blessing together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam asher yitzanu mitzvotav v'sivanu al sfirat omer. So yesterday was day 15, so you can guess what today is. So try saying it with me in Hebrew, and then I'll tell you what we just said. Hayom Shisha Asar Yom Behem Shnei Shavuot Ushnei Yamim La'omer. Today is the 16th day, which makes 2 weeks and 2 days to the Omer. For those who are into math, this is a very good period of time for you. We're going to use an Omer counter, which you do not have to have, but if you have one, you might as well use it. So now we're at 2 weeks and 2 days to the Omer. All right, let's say our la'asok b'divrei Torah blessing together now. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam asher yifshanu b'mitzvotav tivanu al
Divrei Torah.
Sorry, la'asok b'divrei Torah. I get confused sometimes during this period saying these two blessings back to back. Yes. La'asok b'divrei Torah. Praise to you, Lord our God, rule of the universe, who has made us holy with your commandments and commanded us to busy ourselves with the words of Torah. It worked. All right. So our topic for this evening is the prayer for the state of Israel. And on one foot, so to speak, just so that we all know what we're talking about, this is a prayer that is said during Shabbat morning services after the Torah reading and the Haftorah. It is customary to stand for it, though people who do not consider themselves Zionists will either sit or leave during this prayer. So that is what we're talking about. We're going to start by looking at the various sources that went into this prayer, because this prayer was not created out of nothing, but rather drew on texts that came before it. Our first text comes from Jeremiah. Jeremiah is talking to the Jews who are exiled to Babylonia, and he says to them, "Seek the welfare of the city to which I've exiled you, and pray to God on its behalf, for in its prosperity you shall prosper." Even though this prayer, or even though this verse, Jews in exile, it becomes the origin of the idea of praying for the well-being of the country wherever you are. And so in 1948, when the Jews were no longer in exile, this was considered still to be relevant for the idea of creating a prayer for the new state of Israel. Building on this text from Jeremiah, in Pirkei Avot, which is a collection of quotes from the rabbis from 200 BCE to 200 CE, it's part of the who is the vice high priest, or the deputy high priest, says, "Pray for the welfare of the government, for were it not for the fear of it, man would swallow his fellow alive." So it is generally, throughout history, to the advantage of Jews to have a stable government. Because when there is instability, regardless of where you are in the world, it generally does not work out well for the Jews. Like, boring means you have a better chance of staying alive. So this is a quote from 1800 years ago or more that is still highly relevant today. Moving into specific texts that have phrases used in the prayer for the state of Israel. One of the tractates, one of the Masechets of the Talmud is Sota. And Sota talks about a ritual from the Torah for determining whether adultery happened. It was one-sided. It was only if the woman was suspected of infidelity. And one of the things that it says in the tractate is that eventually there was so much adultery that they did away with the ritual of Sota. Once they were talking about that got them thinking about all the other things that eventually ended. And one of the things that ended was the Second Temple. Thank you, Romans. And after that, violent and smooth-talking men gained the upper hand, according to the Talmud. And who is there for us to rely upon? Only upon Avinu Shebashamayim, our Father in heaven. This becomes the first phrase of the prayer for the state of Israel. Avinu Shebashamayim. To my knowledge, it might be the only Jewish prayer that starts this way. Though I could be, although somebody could correct me on that. That phrase also comes up elsewhere in one other spot in the Talmud in Brachot. Going back to the Bible, in the book of 2 Samuel, David has one more speech before he dies, and he starts off by saying that people who rule justly and in awe of God, this is like the light of morning at sunrise, a morning without clouds, bringing vegetation out of the earth. And when David says who told him this, he says that the God of Israel, the Rock of Israel, said this. Sor Yisrael, the Rock of Israel. The idea of God as a rock comes up in a number of places. The phrase Sor Yisrael only also comes up in Isaiah. And then from one or the other of these places, it gets brought into the liturgy at the end of the prayer Michamocha, right before the morning Amidah, the Shachrit Amidah, Sor Yisrael Kuma Be'ezrat Yisrael, Rock of Israel, arise to the help of Israel. So here we have this idea of Sor Yisrael, which also goes into the mix of phrases. In the Talmud, when talking about Passover, the rabbis say that we should recite some of Hallel at the in the middle of the Seder, and then more of it at the end. And after we've said some of Hallel in the Seder, we should refer to God as Goel Yisrael, the one who redeems Israel. And there's a discussion about how sometimes we say Goel Yisrael, sometimes Gaal Yisrael. redeemed Israel, who redeems Israel. Both of these find their places in the liturgy, including in that Sor Yisrael spot right before the Shacharit Amidah, and also in the weekday Amidah. An ancient, it's not really Israeli Siddur, but an ancient Siddur from the land of Israel refers to God as Sor Yisrael v'Go'elo. So drawing Rock of Israel and its Redeemer. So drawing on these two phrases, these two ideas of God, that God is both a steady rock upon whom one can defend or one can depend, whether that is for emotional support or a constant presence or in some other way, as well as God as Israel's Redeemer, probably with this idea of God taking an active part in history, perhaps working through people. So that phrase, Sor Yisrael v'Go'elo, comes into the prayer for the state of Israel.
Sure.
In fact, the very beginning of it is Avinu Sheba Shemayim Sor Yisrael v'Go'elo. So far we've seen where everything comes from. In the Amidah, in the second blessing, we have Matzmiach Yeshua. God causes deliverance to sprout forth. With this image of sprouting, of beginning, and it's not necessarily all the way there. Deliverance doesn't necessarily happen fully formed, but it begins. And so we get the phrases Reshit Smichat Ge'ulatin, the beginning of the Smicha, of the sprouting of our redemption. And then later on the phrase Yeshua, V'ter Yeshua Teatreim, Yeshua of deliverance. These come up as well. In Deuteronomy, Moses gets the last speech, and he refers to God as an eagle who is taking care of its young, protecting its young. And so the part of this image is that we are born along in God's pinions, Evrato. And that becomes part of the prayer with Be'evrat Chastecha, in God's pinions of kindness. So another image there for God. The evening service has a prayer called Hashkivenu. And this is a prayer for protection at night. Night is a scary time. You go bump into things at night. You can't see those who might attack you at night. You can't hide from your thoughts at night. Night is scary. And so there is an extra prayer called Hashkivenu, asking God to take care of us at night. And one of the images in this prayer is that of a Sukkot Shlomecha, refers to Sukkot Shlomecha, that God should spread God's sukkah of peace, God's shelter of peace over us. And that image of Sukkot Shlomecha becomes part of the prayer for the state of Israel, with this hope that Israel will be able to live in peace with its neighbors. It doesn't always do a good job. Sometimes not. Sometimes it's own fault, sometimes not its own fault, but it's a hope. In the book of Leviticus, there is a section called the Tochachot, the curses. And these are all the things that happen if you don't do what God says. And before that, you get the blessings. And the blessings come from doing what God says. And a lot of what God says is getting along with other people around you. And so if you do that, then God promises, V'natati shalom ba'aretz, I will bring peace to the land. And goes on, you will lie down untroubled by anyone. I will give the land respite from vicious beasts, and no sword shall cross your land from you or by anybody else. So this hope of V'natati shalom ba'aretz, that from the beginning of the state of Israel, because this prayer was written only a few months after the country was born, there was a hope for shalom ba'aretz, a hope for peace in the land. Finally, and then we'll take some questions, the prayer for the state of Israel comes in two flavors. There is the shorter version, and then there's the original longer version. The longer version is partly longer because it includes these verses from Deuteronomy. And it is this idea that Moses is telling the Israelites, you are going into the land of Israel. Israel is a place where your ancestors used to live. And even if you are scattered to the ends of the world, then you will be brought into the land. And you will be able to live there. And then hopefully you'll be open to loving God and getting along with your neighbors in order that you may live. And when I went on Birthright and later studied at Hebrew University for a semester, I saw this come true. I met Jews from Russia. I met Jews from Australia. I met Jews from Canada. I met Jews from Chile in Argentina, not to mention everywhere in between, like Ethiopia and France. And so these on a map are the ends of the earth. And yet Jews were all able to come back to the land of Israel. So perhaps in some way this has already come true. Let's stop here. What questions do you have about the phrases and the source material that go into the blessing, into the prayer, before we actually look at it?
There are many prayers ostensibly praying for Israel, yet they don't mention Israel, they mention Jerusalem, namely mentioning a city, just like in the first prayer you looked at here. You mentioned Babylon. You didn't mention a land, a nation. You actually mentioned a city in that nation. Jerusalem, we all know, stands for the land of Israel, but there were many, many years when we had the land of Israel, but we did not have Jerusalem. Have you any thoughts about the use of the city in place of the land when you're actually supposedly praying for the land?
Yeah, so sometimes it's the term Zion, which could in some contexts mean Jerusalem, in other contexts mean the land of Israel. Sometimes it is this idea of having sovereignty, that the kings of Israel ruled from Jerusalem. Eventually, then the kings of Judah ruled from Jerusalem and Judea. And so if we have control over Jerusalem, and if Jerusalem is doing okay, then Kal v'chomer, all the more so, the rest of the situation is probably okay. And we saw that in the 19-year period between 1940 and 1967, when we had West Jerusalem, but not East Jerusalem, and not the old city. We still had Jerusalem, and the seat of government for the new country was in West Jerusalem. But so we were, we had some of Jerusalem, and we were supposed to be able to have access to the holy sites within the old city, but the Jordanians decided to not follow through on what they said they were going to do. So sometimes it's poetic, sometimes it's intentional, and sometimes it's just a stand-in. Other questions or thoughts?
Sometimes I confuse Israel being the land of Israel and Israel being the Jewish people. And I wonder when we do this prayer, if it's not just talking about the land, but to all of us who could potentially be there, or just all of us who are Jewish.
Yeah. It is an interesting idea that there are multiple ways of looking at the term Israel. There's the people of Israel, there's the land of Israel, and there's the state of Israel. And the people of Israel can either mean the people within the land of Israel or the Jewish people worldwide. I find it helpful, actually, to distinguish between them, or to recognize that there is a difference, because I might not always agree with the policies of the government of the state of Israel, but I can still feel connected to the land of Israel, to the people of Israel, and to the idea of the state of Israel, even if I don't agree with everything that its current government is doing. Similar to how I feel about America, actually.
Amen to that.
So when we look at the prayer for the state of Israel, it's an interesting question, and we'll see the text in a few minutes. It's an interesting question of, if you take out the word state, because it does say Barech et Medinat Yisrael, bless the state of Israel. If you just don't say the word state, and instead you're saying Barech et Yisrael, bless Israel, how does that change the meaning? And some pieces might need to be interpreted slightly more allegorically, or metaphorically rather, but I think a lot of it could work, and that could be a possible solution for some people. Other thoughts or questions about the sources?
I have a quick question about one of the earlier sources that was presented. It was for the Siddur that was from the land of Israel. Do you know how old that one is?
I don't actually. Somebody else on Safaria found this source, and unfortunately they did not either know or put out any more about this. So I give credit at the end of my source sheet to everybody whose sources I borrow from my sheet, but unfortunately they did not say this. It says, looking at the Hebrew title for it, Siddur Eretz Yisrael HaKadmon, a prayer book of the land of Israel, not Israeli, but land of Israel from way back. So it's possible that this is something that was found in the Cairo Geniza, which could put it back 1,000 years, give or take a couple hundred. But I don't know for sure. It's a good question.
I got it. I was just curious because I don't actually know how old the oldest Siddur is, so I was
Yeah.
curious if
Absolutely. The oldest Siddur, that one I can tell you, that's goes back to 868 CE. And it was actually an answer. The community, the Jewish community of Barcelona, sent a question to Baghdad to Rav Amram Gaon. He was the leader of the Jewish community in that time period. And they asked, we know that we're supposed to say 100 blessings a day because the Talmud tells us so. But what are these blessings and what order are we supposed to say them in? And a long time later, because everything had to schlep by ship, they finally got back an answer, and that was the very first prayer book, which also had a Haggadah, like the very first Haggadah, at the back of it. And then future prayer books, such as by Sadia Gaon from the 900s, also from Baghdad, built on Rav Amram Gaon's groundbreaking work. So we've only had prayer books for 1200-ish years, give or take a couple decades. And they had to be written by hand until the printing press came along.
Thank you.
Mhm. Other questions?
David?
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a question, but it seems to me that part of it is there's always, depending on context, there are at least 4 things that could be the interpretation. Land, people, land of Israel, state of Israel, people of Israel. I thought of a 4th that I'm now forgetting. I guess modern state and older state, and any of them could be more or less relevant depending on the context.
Yes. Yes, that is absolutely true. It is both helpful to keep in mind that there can be different meanings, and
I mean, even between the Hebrew, the Medina and the Eretz.
mm-hmm.
I mean, those are 2, but I think there are more even by context.
Yeah, Medina being state and Eretz being land.
But
Absolutely.
people,
Mm-hmm.
then the
Yeah.
4th will come back to me. But
Great, you'll drop it in the chat. Thank you. Let's go on. So the prayer was written in 1948. Chief Rabbi Yitzchak Halevi Herzog, with help from another rabbi, Ben Zion Uziel, composed the prayer for the state of Israel. Shai Agnon, who I believe won a Nobel Laureate in Literature for Israel in 1971. Not totally positive about that. He got a look at it, and he added the phrase "Reshit Smichat Geulotenu," the beginning of the flowering of our redemption, and then it got published in September. So this is what it looked like in the Hatzofer newspaper, which only closed a couple decades ago. This was September 20th, 1948. And then in Haaretz, which is an Israeli newspaper still around today, you can see this is the same thing that they printed in Hatzofer. And then the text of the prayer is in both newspapers. Questions about the history of this prayer?
If you can go back up to the first thing, it said something about Rav Kook having a bit of a influence on it. I think.
No,
No, Shai Agnon had the influence.
Yeah.
Okay.
I thought it was Rav Kook actually, and then it turned out that he died a decade or more before this was written. Other questions? All right. With that, we're going to start looking at different versions. So the conservative version was not in the 1964 Silverman Siddur, but it has been in every conservative prayer book since the 1985 Simshalom. So this one, I am going to read it in Hebrew because it is a prayer for Israel, which is a Hebrew-speaking country, but then I will read it in English. Avinu Shabashamayim, Sur Yisrael v'go'alo, Barech et Medinat Yisrael Reshit Tzmichat Ge'ulatenu. Actually, perhaps I'll translate as I go along. So, our Father in heaven, the Rock and Redeemer of Israel, bless the state of Israel, the first sprouting of our redemption. Hagen aleha be'evrat chastecha, ufros aleha sukat shlomecha. Protect it with your great kindness, spread over it the shelter of your peace. Ushlach orcha va'amitcha l'rasheha, sareh v'yotzeha, v'taknem be'etzah tova milfanecha. Grant your light and your truth to its leaders, ministers, and advisors, and provide them with your good counsel. Chazek et yedei meginei eretz kodeinu, v'hanchilem Eloheinu Yeshua v'ater nitzachon te'atrem. Strengthen the hands of the defenders of our holy land, bequeath deliverance to them, our God, crown them with the crown of victory. V'natata shalom ba'aretz, v'simchat olam liyoshveha, and then if you end the prayer here, v'nomar amen. Give peace to the land and everlasting joy to its inhabitants, and let us say amen. So that is the short version. I have here pictures from the 1985 Sim Shalom Siddur, the 1998 Slim Shalom Siddur, where the weekday and the Shabbat/festivals prayer books were separated, the 2006 Or Chadash, which was a conservative prayer book with commentary and explanations and other readings, and then the 2016 Lev Shalem, which also adds transliteration and an alternative prayer for the state of Israel along with explanation. So that's that. The Orthodox version is not actually in most Orthodox Siddurim. It's not in the Art Scroll, but it is in the RCA, Rabbinical Council of America, version of the Art Scroll, published in 1995. And it is in the Koran Siddur. So it starts off the same way as the conservative one, and then it keeps going, mostly with the verses that I showed you and then some extra things. So here's a picture of the Art Scroll RCA, Rabbinical Council of America version from 1996. And here's a picture of it from the Koran 2015 version.
The lack of it in the Orthodox Siddur because the Orthodox believe that state of Israel could not be formed until the Messiah came.
That's my sense of it.
Do they still have that feeling, do you know, in general?
I don't know. I think that it depends where in the Orthodox world you're talking. Modern Orthodoxy uses either the RCA Art Scroll or increasingly the Koran. And so they have this prayer in their prayer books, and I believe say it in the modern Orthodox world. In my experience, it is said. The centrist Orthodox world probably varies a little bit based by synagogue. And the ultra-Orthodox world, there's certainly some branches that believe that the state of Israel is illegitimate and only the Messiah can bring about. political sovereignty in the land of Israel. Satmar would be an example of that. Other branches of ultra-Orthodoxy are okay or in favor of the state of Israel. And I would guess that some of them say this prayer, but I'm not sure if all of them do.
Please.
David,
Yeah,
so we belong to Young Israel,
yes.
and here in Michigan, and our shul says it.
What prayer book does your shul use?
Do you know what prayer book we use?
I haven't, I mean, it's an art scroll.
It's
but
Art Scroll.
I can't remember.
It's an Art Scroll, it's a brown cover,
No,
but
it's black.
oh, it's black. Yeah, but our shul says it every Shabbos.
Okay, great, thank you. So Young Israel, I would put in centrist to modern Orthodoxy, and I would guess you'll check this Shabbos, but I would guess that you're using the RCA version, the Rabbinical Council of America version of the Art Scroll, because that one has it in the 1990, and the one published like just a year either before or behind it, but was not RCA, did not have it.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Just on the topic of sudurs. Are you familiar with it's a newer conservative sudur, but it's like I guess more Sephardic or Mizrahi oriented. I think it's called I think actually it's called Siddur Masorti, or maybe that's the one that the movement uses in Israel. Do you know if they have this prayer, or
If the
version?
if the Masorti movement has a siddur, they would have this in it. I don't know that siddur, but I would say with 100% certainty that the conservative movement has been the longest standing pro-Israel, pro-Zionist movement, and any siddur by the Masorti movement would have this prayer or some equivalent in it.
I see.
David,
Yes.
when I received a gift certificate from Art Scroll a number of years ago, so I added money to it and bought an Art Scroll prayer book, and it does not have the a prayer for the state of Israel. And then when I moved to Lakeview, when I came down to Shalom B'nai Israel, they had the RCA version of the Art Scroll, which does have it. And now the official siddur of ASBI is the Koran, but I still use the RCA Art Scroll because I'm more familiar with it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's very interesting why publishing houses choose to include or not include this prayer in particular. Most prayers, there's not nearly this much variation. All right, moving on to the Reform version. So this was not in the 1975 Union Prayer Book. The first Reform prayer book that has this is the 2007 Mishkan Tefillah, which starts off with a verse from Psalms. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem, may those who love you prosper. Psalm 122, verse 6. And then it has the short version, so the version that's in the conservative movement, except that it takes out the part about those defending the land. Otherwise, it's the same.
It takes out what, David?
The part about those defending the land of Israel. It's like one sentence that's removed. So here we have a version that somebody else managed to put in very nicely. And then here we have a picture that I took of a Mishkan Tefillah. There's also, as of 2015, a Reform prayer book in Poland that was put out with the help of the European Union of Progressive Judaism and they have the same version as the Mishkan Tefillah in Hebrew, but they translated into Polish. The Reconstructionist version, not in the 1954 Siddur, it is in the 1994 Kol HaNeshama Siddur, and it plays with the text as Reconstructionist Siddurim often do. So you get the same general idea, but there are a lot of little wording changes, sometimes big wording changes. It goes beyond where the conservative and reform versions end, but I'm pretty sure that it makes very large changes to what the traditional text has in the second part.
David,
So
is this similar to the fact that in some synagogues, when returning the Torah to the Ark, the line that says, restore, eternal one, the many thousands of troops of Israel, is sometimes omitted? Is that being omitted for the same reason?
it's possible. It would make sense. I haven't gone looking for that line. I know that it is, even when it's not omitted, such as in conservative and Orthodox Siddurim, it's not necessarily said out loud.
It almost sounds like they don't want Israel to be defended for some reason, or maybe they don't want Israel to have the need to be defended, perhaps.
My guess is that the tradition of not saying it out loud came from a time before there was a state of Israel, when we wanted to tamp down on Jewish militarism. Prayer books that deliberately take it out are helped by the fact that it's not being said out loud, and so therefore it is less likely to be missed. And also having a discomfort with the idea of Jews being able to defend themselves. That is my guess. I don't actually know that. Or possibly, to give a more charitable spin on it, wanting to not talk about fighting and war, and having a more peaceful, peace-oriented approach. It would be interesting to look at the Siddurim historically and see when that line gets taken out.
David, if we're going to have time for me to sing this, we're kind of running out of class time here.
All right. Well, with that, we have arrived at the musical versions. So, would you start us off? There are 3 versions here. Would you start us off, please, with the David Berger one?
Yep. Well, it's not going to sound the same as with the entire Zamir Chorale, but at least I'll be able to pick out the melody for most of it.
Okay.
Avinu shebashamayim, Sur Yisrael begoalo, Parech et Medinat Yisrael, Reshit tzmichat Geulatenu. Hagen aleha bevrat chastecha, Uferos aleha sukat shlomecha, Ushlach orecha v'yamidcha l'rasheha sareha v'yotzeha, v'taknem beitza tova milvanecha. Avinu shebashamayim, Sur Yisrael begoalo, Barechet Medinat Yisrael Reshit Smichat Reshit Smichat Reshit Smichat Geulatenu.
Thank you. So that version was written by David Berger in 1975. There is, and I've brought for you Hazamir, which is a choir group that he wrote it for. So you can imagine my father magnified by many, many, many voices in 4-part harmony, and then hear it for yourself. There's also the Salzim version, which was composed in honor of Israel's 40th birthday. And this one goes, Avinu, Avinu, Sheba Shamayim, Sur Yisrael v'go'alam. Avinu, Avinu, Sheba Shamayim, Sur Yisrael v'go'alam. Barech, Barech, Medinat Yisrael, Reshit Smichat Kuatenu. Again Aleha, Befrat Chastecha, Ufros Aleha, Sukkot Shelomecha, Avinu, Avinu, and back to the beginning. And this version was put together by the Jewish a cappella groups of the Maccabees, 613, and Y Studs, which tend to be in friendly competition with each other. But they came together to put this video together in October 2023. I also give you a link to Cantor Ozzy Schwartz doing a version of this with an orchestra and 2 other New York cantors, and he released that video. He recorded in 2017, but he released it in March, late March 2020. So in both cases, it shows how even when Jews disagree about how Israel can be its best self, it can be something that can bring people together. And then there's one more version by Cantor Meyer Finkelstein from 1995, which I am forgetting how it starts, but you can listen to it here. And this was another 2020 version video put together by Reform, Orthodox, and Conservative cantors from across North America. So a variety of options there for tunes. Finally, our appendices. You can see Shai Gnon's handwriting as he worked on this and the typed up version. There are alternative versions. So here's a Neo-Hasidic one. Here's an Israeli Reform one, Israeli Religious Action Center, a prayer that talks about the where is it? The sons and daughters of Hagar as well. And then one written in late 2023, which is pretty powerful. And then finally, the phrase Reshit Smichat Geulatenu, the beginning of the flowering of our redemption, that was very controversial, and here are all sorts of thoughts about it in a Talmudic verse or reference, and then a couple other thoughts, including some history of it. So with that, it is 9 o'clock.